This week, because I really like traveling and I really like food, I'm going to talk about the movie The Trip, made in 2010. It's a great movie, a little bit weird. Some parts I did not like as much as others, but I'll get to that in a minute. First of all, there's a couple fun facts about this movie. Number one being that a lot of this movie was improvised, which I think is really cool because I definitely have done some improv stuff and it's hard to make improv always funny. Not that it's always funny in this movie, but it is a lot of funny. The other fun fact is that if you say, "my cocaine," really close together, you sound like Michael Caine saying his own name. Michael Caine. Michael Caine. The story in itself does not really develop immediately. It kind of seems to take a little while to get going, but once it does, you get the feeling that this is a very impromptu trip, and it's definitely a emotional and life journey that Steve did not want to go on, or had not intended to go on at least. It's obvious that he had intended to make this a very romantic affair. A lot of the tables are, very intimate, very small tables, very close together, put Steve and Rob in some very funny positions. And always he only booked one room, which I would assume is the ideal romantic vacation idea for sleeping arrangements. Well, there is a lot of great humor from the banter between Steve and Rob in this movie. The banter does get a little old because they do it all the time, and I think that they could have cut about 30 minutes off this movie by cutting out some of the unnecessary banter. While it is mostly funny, there's a lot of things where it's just repeats of earlier jokes, and it does feel like a friendship where, you use the same jokes over and over again with an old friend. But at the same time, it just seems like a little bit of an unnecessary storytelling device. However, there are some really funny physical things too, especially when Steve is running around the mountainside, hiking, he's not running, walking around the countryside trying to get cell phone service, because it's damn near impossible to get cell phone service out in the country apparently. A lot of the humor also comes from this very real feeling, very gritty, weird, palpable awkwardness. You can just feel it, especially at the beginning when Steve and Rob probably haven't seen each other for a while. You realize from kind of their dialogue on the phone and things like that, that they probably haven't talked in a while, and that there might have been a falling out of some kind in the past. And so a lot of that awkwardness just comes from their conversations, their interactions, them catching up with each other and trying to, not step on each other's toes in any way, not say anything degrading or mean. But later in the film, it becomes less about them being awkward with each other and more about them just being awkward because of who they are. Steve is really awkward because he keeps trying way too hard, and you get this really weird, oh man, he knows he's past his prime, but he's putting in all this work, and he's putting it in, and he's literally putting it in. But he's also he has this kind of overbearing personality where he's just trying to be the same man he was 15, 20 years ago, and he's trying to throw that on everybody that he's around, and you feel it as just awkwardness. Rob, on the other hand, is awkward just because he's awkward, and he's totally okay with that because he's totally okay with himself. He's totally okay with being really loud and obnoxious in restaurants and doing weird impressions in front of strangers because that's his thing, and he knows it's his thing. He's so comfortable with it being his thing, and so it's awkward, but it's hilarious. And I really appreciate all those parts where he is so himself, and at some points he gets Steve to kind of come out and be himself a little bit too, which is really cool. My note here just says, food is fantastic. I agree. Well, sometimes I felt like there was too much riffing in this movie just for the hell of it. I did enjoy that they did somehow address it a little bit, address that it's a little bit of an unnecessary thing. That especially Steve does. He just talks constantly, and it feels like it. And you feel it throughout the whole movie, and you think that it's just a terrible part of the movie, but then they actually address it, and they address that it's a character flaw, and that it's something that he could change, and they address it in such a cool way. It's not just Rob saying, "Hey, you talk too much," because he does say that, but it's then Steve goes off on his own, and he meets someone else who talks too much, in a way just like he does, and he realizes exactly what it means, like how it feels for Rob to have to listen to him spout all this, not necessarily nonsense, but just bullshit for hours on end. Taking down some big villain, which is always a great movie. It's not a romantic comedy, though those are also great movies, and I'll probably talk about a few of those as well. But it's a friendship movie. And you get a lot of those for kids, but you never get a lot of those for adults. And to see these two kind of estranged friends, it seems like, reconnecting is such a cool thing to me, because a lot of times you start to lose friends as you get older and you grow apart and you do things to each other that the other one hates, and then you kind of lose touch. But this is one of the coolest redeveloping of a friendships I've ever seen portrayed in film. Not because, you know, it's necessarily a great friendship that they're building off of, but because it's not told directly. It's very indirect. They never directly say, hey, I'm glad we're becoming better friends. And the filmography never dictates that, you know, suddenly they're hugging or shaking hands or anything like that. They do it all through these weird impressions, these moments when Rob is able to draw Steve out of his kind of shell that he's put on of this, you know, I'm a big important actor. Rah, 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 rah. That was a terrible impression, but it is those impressions and those weird little moments where, you know, Steve starts to become more of himself and become more comfortable with himself, and Rob just pushes it along and goes with it, and it gets to the point where Steve is even doing impressions around, you know, strangers, where Rob was doing impressions around strangers earlier. And I think that that's a really cool way to tell the story in a way that no other filmographer, and probably no film that was scripted, could have done. The improvisation just feels very much like something you would do as you kind of fell into step again with an old friend. Alright, well that was the trip. Like and subscribe and comment about any other things that you thought I missed, and any movies you think I should watch later. See y'all next week. Bye.